love children's ministry and quizzing, of course, as well. And so thank you for all of your hard work. Thank you for all the hours and hours and hours that you invest in individuals every single year. So why don't you give yourselves a hand for that. All right, I want to go through some fundamental concepts related to abuse and the church. And want to define abuse. I want to spend just a moment talking about grooming, abuse of power. We're going to talk through all of these things. But I suppose it's helpful as we get started on this segment of the educational arm of tonight that we just take a minute and say, what is abuse? So there's a lot of definitions out there. We're going to go with a working one here that simply states that it is an act or failure to act that results in an immediate risk or serious harm. Think about that, the fact that you're going to act or not act, and because of that, there is now an imminent risk, a task that we can prevent. We can prevent this, or at least certainly mitigate this in our church and certainly in our camp and youth and kids settings. 4 types of abuse. There's neglect, there's physical abuse, sexual abuse, and emotional abuse. So, of course, for the thoughts that we're talking about here this evening, really all the pieces that tie into safe church, we're going to hone into sexual abuse and really talk more about that here just for a brief moment. And so let me give you a working definition here. Sexual abuse is defined as an illegal sexual conduct such as rape, sexual assault, aggravated or abusive sexual contact. There's molestation, incest, liberties with minor, including sexual solicitation, indecent exposure, pandering, explicit messages received via text or voice, pictures, video messages. So think of all the things that fall under that umbrella. That is kind of a working definition. And so as we continue, really, in a nutshell, any sexual conduct where coercion occurs under influence, abuse of authority, or position of trust is employed immoral. Now, okay, that's great, and of course I'm having a tough time with it because it's such a sensitive topic, right? It's such a topic that we don't like to talk about as apostolics, right? Pentecostals. We're like, what in the world? Let's talk about Holy Ghost. Let's talk about that. Absolutely, we want that. But if we only talk about that, we shortchange the possibility of protecting some of the most vulnerable students and kids in our care, right? And our parents are entrusting these littles to us, these kids to us, and so it behooves us to put some guardrails in place to protect the sanctity of these individuals and certainly their future. So let me give you now a working definition of grooming. So to understand how abuse is really occurring in church settings, you got to talk about grooming. What is grooming? Well, grooming as an abuser, the individual, they're going to use manipulation, and they're going to manipulate a potential victim, and when this occurs, the victim is able to become abused. So groomers are often appearing charming, they're kind, they're spiritually minded, they're affectionate, they're giving. One person said, I could never have imagined that individual to have done such an act. Well, part of that is because they've done such a great job in almost being a chameleon, a wolf in sheep's clothing. And so these groomers, they're kind, they're giving, they're usually the last person you expect to do this particular act. The purpose of their behavior is really to create an emotional, psychological connection with the victim. Now but not just the victim, now, right? Because there's people that are protecting that child, so they're also going to make inroads into the child's family, the pastor, the leaders of the church. They're just going to do everything in their power to make inroads into that particular family and ministry community. Groomers will often meet the need of the victim to gain more and more trust over time. And then, of course, there are stages of grooming. There's 5 stages that we see. I don't know if I've got a slide on that. I apologize. We have the first stage would be the selection of the individual. So there's the victim selection stage. Then there's gaining access to that isolated child. Then they're going to develop trust in that particular victim, as well as many times the parent, or again, those gatekeepers, if you will, that are protecting that child. They're going to make inroads into that particular situation. Then they're going to begin desensitizing that child to sexual content. There's going to be some physical contact that occurs, and then they're going to maintain that particular abuse. They're going to keep that child and say, hey, by fear or coercion, silencing the child, silencing the victim, or shaming the child. And so these are all the important definitions as we get started on this particular lesson for the second segment. My wife's got the next part of this.
We're talking tonight in the context of abuse, obviously children, but everything you just said can happen adult to adult. And many times, again, in the church setting, we have a hard time understanding. I'm going to frame where we're going to next. Raise your hand if you've ever heard of a pastor who had an affair with a lady in his church. Anybody ever heard of it? Like, you know something that happened, okay? Don't raise your hand for this one. How many times was it, well, that poor guy, and then she tempted him and led him astray and all these sorts of things. You know, we hear all of that. One thing that we want to talk about in terms of abuse of power is there's an inherent power differential. It's very easy to see it. You know, if you are a youth pastor and you are abusing a child in your care, that's easy to see. If you're a pastor, if you're a camp counselor, that's very easy to see. Sometimes it's harder for us to see it as abuse and abuse of power when it is adult to adult, right? But grooming it's not just for an adult to a child. Grooming is anyone who's coming from a position of relational power or spiritual authority over someone else. You may not know this, but in many states, and the number is growing in many states, it is actually against the law to have any sort of romantic relationships with someone under your pastoral care. These are laws that are coming into play because it's very similar to the same way that a counselor cannot have relations with someone they're counseling, and that's in violation of their, license. Why is that? Why is that? Because we understand there's a power differential, and I think people have a hard time understanding the power that someone has when Reverend is in front of your name.
Can I say something to that?
Yes, sir.
I see that light's very red. I don't know if that means on or back or something. I will say this. Someone mentioned to me some time ago, and I took it to heart, that a pastor in particular, when dealing with saints under their care, that type of abuse is no different than a father abusing their child. Because at the end of the day, the dynamic of the authority that a pastor has in the life of a saint is unique and probably unparalleled in modern society. Any pastor knows the level of authority that people give to them, adults and children, is beyond the pale. Doesn't exist with just their boss. Only a parent can equate to that level of authority over them. I'm a pastor. It's 12 o'clock at night if I pick up the phone and call some sister in my church and I said, daughter, I need you to be at such and such a place by 1 a.m. I have a special gift. She might question for a few seconds, why would pastor call me so late? But she's in scripture as telling this thing that you must obey and submit. So the level of authority is so strong that it's no different than a father. It's literal. We have 10,000 instructions in Christ, not many fathers. Pastors like a father figure in the church, period. And so any abuse of a pastor or a saint is no different than child abuse, i.e. your own child. Your own child, like your own daughter, your own son. That's your abuse.
Thank you. Thank you. And I would add probably a different side of the same coin. Another reason that abuse, whether it's spiritual, certainly sexual abuse, another reason why abuse of someone in spiritual authority, by someone who's in spiritual authority is so difficult is because also that person is representing God. Right? So then, is this what God sanctions? Is this what God wants? Is this what God approves of? I can tell you this, I've spoken with hundreds of survivors since I've been in this role. From abuse experience in UPC churches, okay? I can't tell you the overwhelming number of them. It's not just they left the UPC, they don't believe in God anymore. Like one lady, nicest lady you'll ever meet, she's into witchcraft. She's looking for some other source because the person who represented God to her abused the trust, the holy trust that was given in that relationship. Abuse of power is not just a church concept, okay? Abuse of power, there's a reason why in the corporate world, if a senior level employee has relations with someone who, answers to them, many times they'll lose their job, right? Because of that power differential. There's a legal definition of abuse of power that's helpful for us to know. And that definition is a misuse of power by someone in a position of authority who can use the leverage they have to oppress persons in an inferior position or to induce them to commit a wrongful act. So the notion that, so-and-so gave consent, or so-and-so was complicit. First of all, children can't consent. Hey, y'all, I'm going to say that again. Hey, first of all, children can't consent. Okay? Like everybody in this room, we got to know that. A child can't consent. Hey, did you know that if you're 17, in most states, if you're 17 and 344 days old, you're still a child? You still can't consent? Some states, the age of consent is as low as 16, but a lot of states, it's still 18. Hey, and did you know that in our manual, the age of consent is 18? So just throwing that out there. Just giving that aside. I'm so tired of hearing about 16-year-old girls and 28-year-old preachers, and I just, well, she was complicit. You're a grown man, she's still a child. So, anyway, I get worked up about that. Brother Collins already shared about one reason why it's so evil. Abuse of power is so evil because it distorts that sacred trust that's been given. I think that analogy is so powerful. You're a father figure. You're speaking on behalf of God. You're representing everything that's holy. And can I also state this, okay? It's not just the pastor. I'm not just talking about instances like where the pastor is the one who's abusing the child or the saint in the church. Most of the instances that I deal with, honestly, it's not the senior pastor. Thank God. That's not the case. Not even necessarily the youth pastor. But unfortunately, what I do see very often, is it is the senior senior pastor who looks the other way. It is the senior pastor who fails to report. It is the senior pastor who goes and bails the abuser out of jail and allows the abuser back on the platform. And the victim and the victim's family slithers out of the church, broken in a million pieces, wondering, why are you standing on the side of the oppressor? So abuse of power, you don't have to be the perpetrator to abuse your power. All you have to do is be the one to look the other way. All you have to do is be the one to keep your mouth shut when you need to be speaking up.
Yes.
And that's the hard part. That's the hard part of knowing. I want to talk a little bit. Let me say one more thing about abuse of power. Abuse of power is authority that's out of bounds. It's twisting godly authority for our own selfish carnal gain, right? And the sad thing about abuse of power is that if we allow abuse of power, then what we have done is we've watered down spiritual authority. If we allow abuse of power, then what we have done is then for every good pastor who stands in his pulpit every Sunday, that authority has been eroded by the rogue preacher who won't submit to God, won't submit to God's word. So it's not just an isolated incident, it affects every one of us. Every time there is abuse and there's failure to report, and it's United Pentecostal Church, and I don't care if you don't have UPC on your church sign anymore, everybody still knows who you are. But every time it's one, you know what it does? It affects every one of us.
Yes. That's right.
We're all unfairly judged by that. So it is a big problem. I want to talk through just briefly some examples of abuse of power to kind of help us. I want us to think about it from a perspective of 3 different lenses that we can look to kind of help us analyze. So examples of abuse of power. I'm going to talk about legal, moral, and ethical. Okay? Now, I'll start by saying this. Many times we have poor ethics or we make poor choices that lead to poor ethics, and that opens the door to moral failure. And then moral failure leads to breaking the law. Okay? But let me tell you, you can abuse your power without breaking the law. You can abuse your power usually by starting with an ethical violation. And then that leads to a biblical or moral violation. And then in many cases it's legal. So let's talk about the most obvious. Obviously, a 7-year-old molested by a Sunday school teacher, okay. That person's going to jail. If the pastor does what the pastor's supposed to do, that person's going to jail. You know, the pastor reports it. So that's obviously legal. It's moral, it's a sin, right? And it's ethical because it crosses a boundary that should never have been crossed. Well, what about a 25-year-old evangelist sexting a 15-year-old church attendee? You might not know this, but when we're talking about sexting or child pornography or those sorts of things, those are federal offenses, and it's crazy, but those things get more prison time than actual sexual assault, actual physical assault. Many times they do. And so people think it's just what this generation does. It's sin. It's obviously unethical. It's conduct on becoming a minister. Whatever you want to call it in our manual, it's all of that. But it's also against the law. Okay? So, if you've got evangelists coming around and they're, getting to know every girl in every town, keep your eyes on that. Okay, this is talked about a moment ago. Consensual relationship between a pastor and an adult church volunteer. Okay, so I already established a child can't consent. We all agree with that? Hey, raise your hand if you agree that a child cannot consent. I just need a little bit of help. Yeah, okay. All right, good. Thank you. We know that. But I'm kind of hammering home. We are calling this a consensual relationship. But again, Brother Collins, I mean, he hammered home. He can call a woman in the middle of the night, okay? It's not just a UPC, okay? It's spiritual authority. So you can abuse that spiritual authority. And so it could be that, okay, the church volunteer consented, but that's an abuse of authority, because what you did, again, go back to that definition. You used your authority, you twisted it to get that person to do something that was wrong, right? And so in this situation, I already mentioned that in some states, that's against the law. But even if it's not against the law, it's still an abuse of power. I would say, to use Brother Collins' illustration, it's probably not wisdom or ethical to text a lady in the church at midnight, right? Probably not wise. And then, of course, opens the door to moral or biblical issues. Now, let's talk about one that is, because each one of these becomes a little more fuzzy as we go down the list, right? So let's talk about a hyphen leader making just innuendo comments, okay, to college students. Well, hyphen leader, they're both adults and they're all kind of, well, if this were in a work environment, that would be considered sexual harassment. And he'd lose his job, or she would lose her job. I would tell you, I'm a mama of a 14-year-old, and I'm a mama bear. And I've already told my son, hey, you watch out for girls. it runs both ways. I will tell y'all need to know this. Many of the abuse cases that we are seeing right now, it's not just male to female. We always think that's what it is. I mean, there are women to men, women to women. There are in the UPC many cases. So again, we even need to think about that in terms of how we chaperone things. We can't just assume that, okay, well, they're with the girls. No, that's why we have a 2-adult rule and not family. Right? So, but, this might not be against the law, but it's an ethical violation for sure, because it's pressing a boundary. But we would say, as the people of God, it's a moral violation because it lacks purity and they're pressuring someone. So it's just important for us to kind of see and think about those levels of abuse of power, because what that does for us is that helps us to understand I guess I'd say how we should tread softly in our relationships with people, and we should look with keen eyes. We should pray for discernment, for the Lord to show us wolves in the flock. Because, as my husband said, groomers, they're going to be, how many times have you ever, something comes out and I have never in a million years thought that. Yeah, because they're really good at what they do. And that's also why when most people, in most instances, when it finally hits the fan, it's not just one victim. It's not just 2 victims. It's many victims. Because they're really good at what they do, unfortunately. Okay, I want to talk briefly about mandated reporting. I am mindful of the time. Y'all are getting out of here at 9 o'clock. Don't you worry. And whatever we don't get to, it's in your PowerPoint. And y'all can read, and y'all can call me if you have questions, okay? But I want to talk briefly about mandated reporting. There's every state in the United States right now, the majority have mandatory reporting laws. There are very few. For example, Wisconsin. Who's Wisconsin here? Okay. Well, good. He doesn't need to know that he doesn't have mandatory reporting laws in his state. Do you want to know why Wisconsin doesn't have mandated laws for clergy? Because of the Catholic stronghold. Because the Catholic Church has bought their legislature, and they have refused to implement mandated reporting laws that are everywhere else across the country. Most every state has mandated reporting laws, and many of them specifically named clergy. In Texas, it just says anybody who has knowledge. Period. Okay? It's not, when I first became a teacher 150 years ago now, I'm from North Carolina, and it was very limited then. It was kind of like, medical professionals and teachers. But it's all expanded now. So the other piece is that according to our manual, we say that you should report. And as I mentioned before, we count minors as anything under 18, according to the UPCI manual. Okay? So I want to talk a little bit about what mandated reporting looks like. So how do I know if I should make a report? And this handout right here. So this front side had kind of what we already went over. This back side, who's a mandated reporter, it tells you kind of all of that. And this process will tell you, this is a document that you're going to have a digital version of as well. So feel free to share that in your church, share it certainly in your district with other pastors. Feel free to share that. How do I know I should make a report? Well, basically, if you have reasonable cause to suspect the child is being abused or neglected, then you should report. Reasonable. It's not your job to investigate, it's your job to report. So let me explain. Let me just talk real briefly about what this means. I think, let's go to the next slide and then I'll mention this piece, please. Thank you. For the protection of everybody, so church people, potential victims, pastor, saints, for the protection of everyone, all church workers and leaders should consider themselves mandated reporters. If you live in Wisconsin, consider yourself a mandated reporter. And I'm going to tell you why. Okay? Here's what happens. Even in the very few holdover states where they still don't include clergy in the mandated reporting, what is happening is that churches are being sued, individual pastors. They are saying Calvary Pentecostal, John Eisen, right down the line, being sued and taken to the cleaners. Let me tell you, there's a church very recently, failure to report. It was a bad situation. That pastor messed up. And you know what? The person, now y'all can say this was vengeful and this was hateful and they shouldn't have done it. The victim's parents, you know what they did? They sued the church, and you know what they got? The church building. They sued for the church building, and now they own that church building. Because they said, we want to make sure this doesn't ever happen to anybody. We're going to just blow this thing up. This, folks, the days of stuff being shoved under the rug, it's over. Have y'all ever heard of a thing called the internet? Have you ever heard of social media? If you breathe the wrong way out of the wrong nostril, it's there, right? But I will say this. We can demonize and villainize all these people, all these victims who come forward and who are bitter. Well, sure they're bitter. I'm sure they're bitter. We can demonize them. But what grieves my heart is that many of them are speaking truth to things that we've stuck our heads in the sands So many years. And if the Church of God had the integrity and the conscience to stand up and say what needs to be said, then maybe some of these people would still be living for the Lord today. That's what grieves my heart the most. And so, when we're talking about, again, I said at the very beginning of this, I don't believe that protecting victims or protecting, first of all, prevention, but supporting victims and supporting the ministry are mutually exclusive. You're going to have a lot more integrity. Let's not even think about the legal. Let's not even think about, the financial ramifications. Let's think about integrity in your community. People aren't stupid. Again, abuse is a human problem. It is a sin problem. That's why anywhere there's people, you're going to see it. But people respond, and they have confidence. There's a situation, if I told you this pastor's name, y'all would know him. Incredible man of God. And they had a horrible situation in their church. And immediately he found out, he called and reported. It had already been reported by the parent. He didn't take any chances. He called, he reported, he got counseling for the child, he reached out, he did everything right. Let me tell you what happened in that scenario. There was a new convert who'd been coming to church. He shared this with me, maybe 5-6 months, okay? New convert. Anybody pastor new converts? They're not fully established. They're not, So in that process of being converted, and this person said to him, I've been coming to this church, and I think you're a good preacher, and I've enjoyed it. I didn't quite know where I was going to land, how long I was going to be here, but let me tell you what. I saw the integrity that you had, and I saw how you stood up. And I saw how you did what was right. I saw how you apologized to the whole church for this going on under your nose without you knowing. I saw how you went above and beyond to help this family. And you know what? Now I know you're a man of integrity. And now I know that you can be my pastor. You see, because what we want to do is we want to hide it and bury it. How many situations of abuse has the victim and the victim's parents been told, don't say anything. If you tell anybody this, you will ruin the church. Or even worse, now let's bring in the abuser. Now the two of you need to work this out. You need to forgive. Y'all, that didn't just go on 20 years ago. That still goes on. Now, today. But the problem is, unsaved people, heathens in the world know that the truth is more powerful than brushing under the rug. So, if the truth is ugly, it's ugly, but it's the truth. And Jesus Christ came to redeem us. But he can only do that through the truth. And so when we act in honorable ways, we actually gain more credibility in our community. We think it's going to destroy our church, but look what happened in the situation that I mentioned to you. So I want us to understand, I want us to think about that. Ways that an abuse allegation can affect a church. Okay, a ministerial process. So everybody here in this room knows about our judicial procedure. Brother Myers was here. He has a procedure committee. You could ask him all the questions you want to know. If you don't report, charges can be brought against you, not just legal, but with the UPC. And you can be placed on probation. You can lose your ministerial license. You can lose your church. It's pretty serious, according to our manual. Obviously, also, criminal charges, civil charges, again, like we said, not necessarily just against the perpetrator, but it's considered what is the system that allowed this to happen. And we want to make sure that system doesn't allow this to happen to someone else again, right? And I'm not telling y'all all this to scare you. Y'all not going to sleep all night tonight. Y'all be thinking, I'm going to call people in my church. What are we doing? What do we have in place? I'm not telling you all this to frighten you. I want you to understand the reality of where we are. Because I believe that in this room, this is the group right here who can absolutely change the direction of your district in that regard. And you can help. Many of our districts are very strong in this regard. Many of our districts have a lot of room to grow in this regard. And children's ministry, you can be the voice that people will listen to in your district. God has given you authority. God has given you favor. Everyone knows your heart for children. And so when you speak up in your district, people know that you're coming from a place of love for children, for the vulnerable. They're not thinking that you're just trying to meddle in somebody's business, some other preacher's business. You're trying to speak up the way God has called us to speak up. So those are ways. Okay, what should be reported? Of course, anything that was listed in that definition that we talked about, any signs of physical abuse, any allegation or reasonable cause. So what is a reasonable cause? Well, if a child comes to you at church and you see them, in Sunday school, you're working with someone, you see them, they don't want to go around someone, and you say, "What's wrong?" "Oh, I don't want him to touch me. I don't want him to touch me." Now, again, you're not on a witch hunt, okay? But again, focus in, be aware, think about what's going on. If a parent comes to you and reports something, if a child tells you something, that's it. You report. Everything within you is going to be, "Not Brother Bob. He's the best man I know. He's been in children's ministry for 30 years. Yeah, there's probably a reason he's been in children's ministry for 30 years, Right? So, everything within us is going to say, "No, this can't be." But let me tell you, we're not the professionals. We are not the professionals. Our job is to report and let the professionals investigate. Yes, sir.
I was a screener and an investigator for about 5-6 years, social protective service. And a lot of people don't report because they're afraid people are going to get in trouble. What you have to understand is that the screener and the investigator, they know what they're doing. So even if something might be going on and you're not sure, they'll get to the bottom of it. We just have to actually give information. And so if something is not going on, they'll find it too. I've screened out more cases than I screened in, simply because somebody brought something to our attention. So don't be afraid to send it to Child Protective. It's just realizing that they know what they're doing and they'll screen things out if it's not happening.
Thank you for sharing that. And I would say a reality piggybacking on that. Okay, I'm going to give you an example from my locale. Texas, like every other state, is overburdened. We don't have enough resources to take care of every child that is in a bad spot. And so I have seen it that it is incontrovertible evidence that a child is being abused. So the state takes that child out of the home, okay? Say it's maybe a stepdad or, whatever. State takes that child out of the home, but they leave 3 other small children in the home. And we're like, there's 3 other little girls. And you know that he's abused the oldest. Well, we don't have any proof. So I think so many times we think that the government is out looking to do all of this. They don't have the resources to do it, even if they were, and even kids who need to be pulled out. It's very hard. And thank you for that kind of work, because that's hard work. That's very hard. Thank you for sharing that. Yes, sir.
I think also, I really feel it's in a very good way, because I know people, especially anybody who's pastoring, for the most part, pastors are always trying to do the good, they're always trying to see the good where others can't, and give people the benefit of the doubt. So this is hitting real hard. I feel a lot of conviction, and talking to be perfectly honest, because I can think of scenarios where, here's Brother crime that you are presumed guilty until proven guilty, not the other way around. So it's automatically, they're going to do an investigation, but the burden of proof is on the so-called perpetrator. And so that's really strong. It's amazing. Strong stuff.
Also, most states, the person who's the mandated reporter, they are anonymous until that person is
Correct. Very good point. I want to share something to your point. Of course, we talked about financial ramifications, right? If you're sued. I'll tell you one thing Pastor Bernard shared that, and I thought, well, yeah, that's a pretty powerful way to say it. He was having a conversation with someone, and they were adamant they weren't going to report, all this over and over. And he said, I'm sure he didn't do it. I'm sure he didn't do it. And pastor's like, and he's a good lawyer, so he just went through all the reasons that this is why you should. I'm sure he didn't do it. Pastor said, let me ask you this. Are you willing to wager your church building, your home, your personal assets, every other saint in the church, your entire legacy of your ministry? Are you willing to wager all of that your one hunch is right? Oh, and that person's eternity, the victim, right? And so if we think of it that way, can you go to we'll come back with the slide about the percentages. What slide is that? Number 7, thank you. I'll come back to this, but what about innocent until proven guilty? So I understand what Brother Collins was saying in terms of the burden of proof. Here's why. 93 to 96% of reports are proven to be true. The number of people who speak up is such a small percentage. So many people who've been abused who never open their mouth. Why? It's so shameful. Why? Because of everything that he said. Because if I say this, my parents are going to be embarrassed, this is going to happen. Why? Because the abuser has already told them, I'm a man of God. If you say anything, they're not going to believe you. And look at your reputation. Who's going to believe you anyway? Do you know that really good groomers, you know who they go after? They usually go after people with bad reputations. People who are marginal anyway. Because nobody's going to believe them because they already have a really bad reputation. Yes, sir.
Just real quick, I just want to say thank you. Our church went through a very hard ordeal about 2.5 years ago, and when we discovered Safe Church, this really changed our lives and how we looked at things and how we viewed, and it caused us to put some systems in place. And very thankfully wasn't anyone that was underage, but the individual waited until these young ladies would turn 18, and he was in authority. He was in a place of leadership, and I'm telling you, it about destroyed our church. But thankfully, with God's help, we came through that. We reported everything, but then whenever I made all of our staff go through this Safe Church, and it took us several months to get through it. And I'm telling you, people would begin to weep just watching the videos, going through the lessons, and it just really, it was life-changing. And as one brother said, I wish we had this 10 years ago, 5 years ago. Thank you so much for this. It truly is life-saving.
Thank you. And I appreciate that example that you give. That is also, again, if you think about the really sick mind of abusers, they know the law.
Yes.
And so it's very common that they will groom from very young. They'll be patient. They'll be calculated. I can't tell you the number of young ladies who literally the day they came of age in their state, there was rape there was consensual sexual activity, but he'd been buying her gifts since she was 12. He'd been telling her how pretty she was. He'd been giving her solos in the choir. It's very common. And what happens in our churches, can I be honest, a lot of times this is normal dating. Can I say that? I mean, you have a 25-year-old man who, by the time he's 30, he's marrying a girl who's 18, but he's been sweet on her since she was little. That's predatory behavior. It's not 1950 anymore, no. That's predatory behavior. Yes, sir.
I wanted to share something with you that might be helpful to put some passive at ease. There is a lot of power having policies and procedures in the corporate world. When you deal with someone, I used to run a very large company with well over 100 employees, and if something came to me from HR, we had to do the investigation because our insurance required it, not based on what I thought about it or my relationship with you, but then that raised the line. But I remember telling people in my company, I have to report this, we're going to report this. If you've got nothing to have us to worry about, this is just policy and procedure, it's not personal. And we have this in our churches where this is just policy and procedure. Don't take it personal. You've got nothing to hide. This is what we do. That's going to put a safety net over how you're moving forward in operating the company.
Absolutely. And when you can come to, let's say that is one of those 4% that is a false claim. Okay? Then how do you handle that? We're going to report this. This is going to be investigated. For the time being, I want you to step back from any leadership responsibilities that you're having. Depending on the severity of the situation, they may need to attend another church for a while, right? You know, let's let this play out, right? And then if you let it play out, you let the people who are professionals, who are professionally trained, who know how to do this, you let them do that, and then you provide pastoral care. Can I say this? This isn't in my notes. Please, especially when someone has been found guilty from your church, please don't write a letter to the judge asking for mercy. That's your easiest way to lose any kind of credibility in your community. Please don't. Please don't do that. Please, we don't want to be seen as standing on the side of the oppressor, of the abuser. They're in God's hands. We pray for them. But please, think about the victim in that situation. And like you said, if you have policies or procedures in place, then it's not personal. And I would imagine if everybody in this room, if you talk to your insurance company, that those are the policies and procedures they expect you to have in place, right? I'm very aware of time. I have 4 minutes, and here's what I'm going to do. How do we report? I just want you to see this process here. The best rule of thumb is to make the report and to do it by the end of the day, okay? In our, across the U.S., some of them say same day. I think most that I know of any state is 72 hours that you have to report. Here's the problem that I have as pastors. The longer we delay in reporting, then what we're doing is we start investigating. And then we start weighing it out. We start saying, well, should we? Oh, but you know she's not really got the best reputation. Can we believe her? Right? Then it becomes more of a, whereas if we just report, well, what if you get more information? Then great, call back in. Here's what's really important. The legal responsibility falls on anybody who heard the report. And so if you're, let's say it's your youth pastor, they told your youth pastor, this is what I would do if I were you. I'd go in the room with the youth pastor, and it'd be me, you know, if I'm the senior pastor, I'd be with the youth pastor, and we'd call in together. We'd say, we're calling to report. I'll give my name, youth pastor gives his name, her name, and you take down, you need to get a case number. This is all listed here. You need to get a case number You need to report as soon as possible. You get that case number, and then they will start the investigation process. But the last thing you want it to look like is that you were, oh, well, they came to me and I didn't follow up on it as quickly as I should have. Okay? So you want to do that. Even if the report comes to you secondhand, let's say that somebody just told your youth pastor, so, well, they told me this. Well, you're the pastor, the buck stops with you. Or you're the children's ministry director for the District of Arkansas, the buck stops with you. You need to make sure that you called it in, right? So I don't want to trust that someone else called it in. People have said they did and they didn't. And no one called it in. And they're not coming to look for the youth pastor, they're coming to look for you. So you want to call. And here's what you do. You call your local children's services agency. Y'all, before camp, you need to know that number. You need to figure that out. You need to know it. You call them. Some states will require you to also put something in writing. They have like an online form that you complete. But you call the hotline. You provide all known information. So the child's name, age, parent, guardian, address, alleged abuser, details of abuse. Maybe it's a kid who comes on your bus and you don't have all that information. You provide whatever it is you know. Even if you feel like you don't know enough, you just provide what you know. And look at your neighbor and say, document. Document, and save the case information. So you want to ask for the caseworker's name. You want a case number. If they say, oh, we don't have a case number for this, that's not very common. Then you be sure you get that caseworker's name. You get the date and time that you just make a report yourself. I spoke to such and such. Maybe even if you want to have proof of it, and you call in on your phone, just do a screenshot of the phone number, and you can, so you can kind of have proof that you called. So that's what we advise to protect yourself. So how you report. The other thing that I would tell you is, especially in districts, something happens at your church, and you report. Maybe that person quits coming. We live in metro. A lot of us are in metro areas. It's really easy for someone to go just to the other side of the city and sneak up there. So I would also encourage you to notify your district superintendent and notify your presbyter. Say, hey, this is what's going on. Because you know what's going to happen? When they find out UPC, they're going to be calling up Brother Weber. And they're going to say, I heard about this from this church. Can you tell me about this? So these are all, again, all of these are things that we can do to protect the most vulnerable, to help support victims. And they protect you. They protect your ministry. They protect the legacy. Everything that you have invested, your blood, sweat, tears into all these years. It protects all of that. And so we don't have to choose one or the other. We can have that kind of integrity. I will say that if y'all have questions, we'll be available. You can come talk with us after. Some of you asked about back to the video training for the camp workers. Some of you had asked about how to roll that out. And in Louisiana, with their massive kids camp, he was sharing that they have in the application process, they have a link directly to do the Safe Church training. So will you wave to everybody so y'all can talk to him? He will try to, if you want more information on that, he's going to try to get with a brother in his district who is one who sets that up, and I just wanted to mention that as well. Y'all have been amazing. Here we are in our Hawaiian fun. Y'all can turn on a dime, and thank you for taking this seriously. Thank you so much. Yes, sir.
Safe church, safe our church. That's what we do. And the words of Jesus, we can all agree, Luke 17. If anybody offends my little ones, so in Indiana, the last 2 years, our district conference
not touched on that. But that's probably something that we need to add to the UPCI ministers.com. Thank you. And obviously, if you have children, children as young as 6 and 7 and 8 years old have their own smartphones and their own social media accounts. It's crazy. And so, that's how they are groomed and that's how they are trafficked, because it's not just people from foreign countries. Yeah. Thank you.
Well, there's no question about it. The weapons of our warfare are not carnal. So, for all of you that wants to move up to a new level in Christ, remember, there's a new devil with every level. I have a friend of mine that was